Have you ever seen a child's drawing speak louder than her voice? In a quiet town where shadows hid behind polite smiles, a brave little girl found a way to cry for help without saying a word. And when a weary police officer and his loyal German shepherd discovered her secret, the truth shook everyone. Today we'll step into that journey of courage, heartbreak, and unexpected family. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these true tales of hope and redemption. May your day be filled with light, no matter where you are. The small town of Ashford lay beneath a pale winter sky, its streets pressed under the weight of gray clouds that threatened snow, though it had not yet fallen. The air carried a damp chill, seeping through coats and gloves, while the Saturday market spilled across the town square in a jumble of noise and color. Vendors called out their prices with tired voices, mixing with the sharp cries of children darting between stalls. The smell of onions, raw fish, and earth mixed with dust that the wind lifted from the gravel paths. At first glance, it was a scene of ordinary life, yet the heart of the market held a silence heavy enough to suffocate. At the center of that silence was a girl no older than 9, kneeling on the sharp gravel as she scrambled to gather sweet potatoes and wilted greens from the ground. Her name was Lily, though few bothered to use it. She had tangled brown hair that fell like a curtain across her thin, pale face, her small frame wrapped in a faded sweater too large for her. Its sleeves rolled clumsily above her scraped wrists. Her lips trembled as she whispered apologies, her voice so faint it was almost lost in the noise of the square. "I'm sorry. I'll pick everything up. Please don't hit me again." The faint sound carried a weight that stilled the laughter of those nearest. People watched, but no one stepped forward. A few shook their heads as though pitying her misfortune, while others smirked and pulled out their phones to record the scene, as if her humiliation was entertainment. Towering above Lily stood her father, John Miller. John was 45, a broad-shouldered man with a thick belly that strained against his stained flannel shirt. His face was flushed, not from cold, but from the alcohol that soured his breath, his red eyes sharp and cruel. Years of hard labor once carved strength into his body, but drink and bitterness had eroded it into something heavier, darker. He barked at the girl with a voice that carried across the square, accusing her of being useless, of bringing shame on him in front of neighbors. His fists rested on his hips, a stance meant to look like authority, but revealed only violence simmering beneath the surface. Beside him stood Veronica, his second wife. At 37, she had a slim figure carefully dressed in a fitted coat and scarf that spoke of vanity despite the modest life she lived. Her curled blonde hair framed a face painted with dark red lipstick and sharp eyes that gleamed with contempt. Her smile never reached her eyes, and when she spoke, it was with a sweetness dipped in poison. Maybe all she knows how to do is make a scene, just like her mother did. She folded her arms, enjoying the spectacle as if cruelty gave her strength. Life with John had hardened her, but cruelty had always been in her nature, sharpened by jealousy and the hunger to control someone weaker. Lily gathered the last of the vegetables, her scraped hands trembling. The silence deepened as her father's voice rose again, calling her a disgrace, while her stepmother's disdain settled over her like a net she could not escape. No one dared move forward until the sound of polished shoes striking gravel cut through the murmurs. Nathan Cole had been walking his patrol route when the scene froze him in place. At 42, Nathan carried the bearing of a man who had lived too many lifetimes within one. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair streaked with gray and cropped short beneath his patrol cap. His face was weathered, a square jaw set with deep lines carved by loss more than age. His storm-gray eyes often looked distant, as though searching for something he had lost in the shadows of memory. He wore the dark winter uniform of the town's police department, his heavy jacket buttoned to the throat, and by his side trotted a German shepherd named Rook. Rook was 7 years old, a black and silver male with a powerful build and thick winter coat. His amber eyes gleamed with intelligence and loyalty. A faint scar cut across his left flank, a mark of his service in a violent arrest years before. Though disciplined and alert, Rook carried himself with a quiet calm, a guardian more than a weapon. He was deeply bonded to Nathan, sensing the man's grief even when Nathan tried to bury it beneath the duties of a badge. Nathan's heart clenched as the scene before him blurred into memory. 10 years earlier, in a sterile hospital room, his daughter had knelt on the floor clutching his hand, her pale lips whispering, "Daddy, don't leave me." He had lost her to illness, and not long after, his wife had succumbed to grief. Since then, Nathan's heart had grown cold, his life emptied of laughter. But here, in the middle of the market, Lily's trembling figure struck through him like a blade. He stepped forward, the crunch of his boots on gravel drawing every eye. John turned, frowning, his harsh voice booming. "What do you want? This is my daughter. How I teach her is my business. Stay out of it." Veronica smirked, tilting her head as though waiting for Nathan to falter. Nathan did not answer at first. Instead, he bent down, picked up a bunch of vegetables from Lily's small hands, and held them toward the nearest vendor. His voice was low and steady. "I'll buy it all, whatever the price." The vendor hesitated, uncertain, but Nathan had already pulled a thick stack of bills from his wallet and pressed them into the man's hand. Then he knelt beside Lily. His gloved hand reached for hers, lifting her gently to her feet. She flinched at his touch, her wide eyes shimmering with tears, her hand cold as ice. In that moment, Nathan felt his chest tighten, as though his heart were being crushed. Rook pressed close, sniffing Lily's hand, his warm breath rising like smoke in the winter air. Lily's trembling slowed slightly as her small fingers brushed the dog's fur. The first kindness she had felt in weeks. Nathan's voice was softer now, almost like a vow. "You're safe. Stand with me." The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads, others looked away, unwilling to be part of the scene. Veronica laughed, her voice dripping disdain. "Mr. Cole, the noble officer, defending a filthy little girl now? Perhaps you have too much time on your hands." Nathan ignored her, his gray eyes sharp as steel, locked on Lily's. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, life itself breaking through the ice. Lily's lips trembled, and she clutched lightly at the hem of his jacket. Her voice came out weak, almost inaudible, but he heard it clearly. "Please, don't let them take me away." Nathan froze. The sound of her plea echoed like his own daughter's voice calling from beyond the grave. His hands trembled slightly, but his gaze never wavered. John, face red and fists clenched, lunged forward and yanked the basket from his daughter's arms, hurling it violently to the ground. Vegetables scattered once more across the gravel, rolling to the feet of onlookers. The crowd gasped. Lily stumbled backward, her terrified eyes fixed on her father. Nathan stepped closer, standing between her and John, his presence solid as stone. Rook growled low in his throat, his amber eyes blazing, fur bristling in warning. John pointed a thick finger at Nathan, spitting the words like venom. "I'm warning you. Don't stick your nose into my family's business. She's my daughter. I'll discipline her as I see fit. Do you think just because you wear a badge, you can do whatever you want?" Nathan did not raise his voice. His words came calm, cold, each one cutting like ice. No one has the right to break a child." His hand rested gently on Lily's shoulder, a reassurance meant for her, not for the man before him. Lily's tears welled again, but she nodded faintly, her small hand clutching his coat, as though it were the last fragile thread of safety left to her. The market held its breath, the silence deeper than before. Some whispered, others turned away. John's nostrils flared, his body tense, but Veronica laid a hand on his arm, her voice syrupy sweet, though her eyes gleamed with malice. "Enough, dear. Don't make a scene. Let her bear the consequences herself." John let out a harsh snort, but did not strike. He spat on the ground, dragged Veronica by the arm, and stormed out of the market, throwing back a final threat. "Don't let me catch you near her again." The square slowly stirred back to life, whispers swirling. But Nathan stood firm, shielding Lily, and Rook pressed close by his side. He bent to meet Lily's wide gaze. His voice softened. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her lips quivering before she whispered, "Lily." Nathan gave a slight nod, sorrow flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Such a beautiful name. He did not ask more, only said softly, "Go now, but remember, we'll meet again." and as Lily slipped back into the crowd, her thin frame swallowed by the market's noise, Nathan felt the echo of a vow settling deep in his chest, one he could not yet speak aloud, but one he knew would shape the days ahead. That night, Ashford lay under a sky heavy with iron-gray clouds, the cold deepening until frost gathered along the eaves of houses. Street lamps glowed weakly, their yellow light diffused by the mist that crept through alleys. Nathan Cole drove slowly down the narrow lanes toward his modest home at the edge of town, Rook resting in the back seat of the patrol car. The market's images still clung to him, the child kneeling on gravel, the venom in her father's voice, the way her fingers had clutched his coat like a plea. His hands tightened on the wheel as he turned into his driveway. Nathan's house was small, a 2-story with fading blue paint and shutters in need of repair. It had once been filled with laughter, but after his wife and daughter died, silence had claimed every corner. As he stepped inside, Rook trotted past him, claws tapping against the wooden floor. Nathan dropped his cap onto the hook near the door, the badge on his chest feeling heavier than ever. He moved into the kitchen, flicking on a single light. The table sat bare, except for a worn picture frame he never had the strength to put away. The photograph inside was of Emily Cole, his daughter, 9 years old when she had passed. She had hair the color of wheat, tied into braids that swung when she laughed, and eyes so alive they seemed to carry sunlight. Next to her stood Hannah, Nathan's wife, a slender woman with kind features framed by dark auburn hair. Hannah had been warm with everyone, a school teacher who saw promise in even the most difficult child, but grief had consumed her after Emily's death, leaving Nathan to bury 2 graves in the span of a single year. Nathan sat at the table, elbows braced against the worn wood, staring at their faces until they blurred. His chest ached as he recalled Lily's whisper in the market, "Please don't let them take me away." The words had fused with Emily's memory so tightly that Nathan felt as though past and present had collapsed into one. His hand brushed the old bracelet lying beside the frame, the one Emily had given him on her last birthday. Rook padded over and rested his head on Nathan's knee, amber eyes watchful. Nathan let out a long sigh, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We lost one old friend," he murmured, voice low. "I can't lose another." Across town, Lily sat curled on the porch steps of her father's house. The Miller home was a sagging structure of peeling paint and broken shutters, set on the edge of a dirt road where street lamps barely reached. Inside, John had collapsed into a chair, an empty bottle at his feet, while Veronica paced the kitchen with a cigarette between her fingers. Lily pulled her thin sweater tighter around herself, stomach growling with hunger. She whispered to the night air, as though afraid even her breath might anger them. "I'm hungry, but I mustn't cry. If I cry, Mother will be angry. Father will scold me." Her words were carried away by the wind, heard only by the stars. Meanwhile, Nathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His sergeant, Mark Denton, had sent a message. "Need you tomorrow, early patrol. Big load of vendors coming back through town." Nathan closed the message without replying. Mark Denton was in his late 50s, a stocky man with thinning hair and a brusque manner. He had served Ashford all his life, known for loyalty, but also for turning a blind eye when silence kept the peace. He believed in avoiding conflict, and Nathan knew what he would say if told about Lily. "Stay out of family matters, Cole. Don't stir up trouble unless you've got evidence." That silence, the same silence that had ruled the market, burned in Nathan's chest like acid. Nathan rose from the table, restless. He opened a drawer in his study and pulled out a stack of documents he had once researched on the child protection laws. He had kept them after failing to save a boy years ago when the system faltered. That case had haunted him. A child returned to abusive parents because evidence was thin, only to later be hospitalized from further harm. Nathan had sworn then that if he ever had the chance, he would act before it was too late. His eyes traced the print of old legal statutes, his jaw clenched. Rook stirred, ears flicking toward the window. Nathan followed his gaze. Outside, the street was empty except for a lone figure walking slowly under the lamp's dim glow. It was Martha Jenkins, the elderly vegetable vendor Nathan had noticed at the market earlier, the one who had let Lily carry baskets. Martha was in her 60s, short and plump, with silver hair tied in a bun beneath a wool hat. She lived alone since her husband's passing, surviving by running a modest stall with greens and potatoes. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, though years of hardship had left her with a limp in one leg. Martha was known for her sharp wit with customers, but those close to her also knew she had a soft spot for children, often slipping an apple into a child's basket when their parents weren't looking. Nathan stepped outside, greeting her with a nod. "Evening, Mrs. Jenkins." Martha adjusted the strap of her basket, her breath fogging in the cold. "Evening, Officer Cole. You look troubled at the market today." Nathan hesitated, then said, "That girl, Lily Miller, she works for you sometimes?" Martha's expression tightened, the lines of her face deepening. "She does. Carries baskets for a few coins. Quiet child, too quiet. Looks like she hasn't had a proper meal in weeks." She glanced down the street, lowering her voice. "People see things, officer, but they don't want to get involved. John Miller's temper, well, you know it." Nathan felt anger coil inside him, but he kept his tone steady. "If I can't rely on witnesses, there's little I can do." Martha studied him, eyes sharp despite her age. "Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone at first." She handed him a small cloth bag from her basket. "Bread. If you see her, give her this. Tell her it's from me." Nathan accepted the bag, gratitude flickering across his face. Martha gave a faint nod and walked on, her limp more pronounced in the cold. Rook whined softly, tail twitching, as if urging Nathan to act quickly. Back inside, Nathan placed the bread on the table, his mind racing. The system demanded evidence, but his conscience demanded action. He thought of Lily huddled on that porch, whispered words disappearing into the night. He thought of Emily's last breath. And in the silence of his home, with Rook pressed against his side, Nathan swore that this time he would not turn away. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, the sky streaked with thin lines of silver, as the first hint of snow whispered against rooftops in Ashford. The market was alive again, though subdued, its vendors returning to their stalls with practiced motions. Nathan Cole had risen early, restless from a night of fragmented sleep. His thoughts had returned again and again to Lily sitting on the porch, whispers carried to no one. He had carried that ache with him into the new day, and as he walked with Rook trotting beside him, his patrol uniform buttoned tight against the cold, he knew where his steps would lead. The market stalls were already open when he arrived. Men in heavy coats unloaded crates of apples. Women with woolen hats arranged vegetables on cloth-covered tables. The smell of coffee and fried dough lingered from a cart at the corner, where a stout woman named Agnes Brewster sold warm pastries. Agnes was in her 50s, with rosy cheeks from years of working over hot ovens, her arms thick and strong, her smile quick when she wasn't scolding customers for pinching samples. She had raised 3 children on her own after her husband died in a factory accident, and the loss had made her fiercely independent. She noticed everything and rarely kept opinions to herself, though beneath the bluntness was a generous heart. Nathan nodded to her as he passed, and Agnes raised a flour-dusted hand. "Officer Cole, you're up early. Coffee?" "Another time," Nathan said, managing a thin smile. Rook barked softly, and Agnes bent to pat his head. "You take care of him," she said, wagging a finger. "He looks like he works harder than most men in this town." As Nathan moved deeper into the market, he spotted Lily. She was carrying a wicker basket almost too large for her, walking carefully beside Martha Jenkins, the elderly vendor from the night before. Martha's limp was more obvious this morning, her face pinched with pain from the cold. Lily bore the weight of the basket without complaint, though her face was pale and her small frame seemed ready to buckle under the load. Nathan watched her for a moment before approaching. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. Rook trotted ahead, tail swishing, eyes warm as he looked up at Lily. Lily froze, her fingers tightening on the handle of the basket. Her brown hair fell across her face, but Nathan could see the hesitation in her wide gray eyes. She had learned to fear attention, to recoil from it. Martha gave a polite nod. "Morning, officer. She's been a great help." Nathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the cloth bag Martha had given him the night before. Inside was the bread, still fresh enough to smell faintly of yeast. He knelt so his eyes were level with Lily's, holding it out. "Eat this. You'll feel better." Lily shook her head quickly, panic flickering in her expression. I can't. If they find out, they'll be angry. Her voice was barely a whisper, so faint it could have been mistaken for the rustle of leaves. Nathan's heart twisted. He kept his voice steady, gentle. No one has the right to take food from you. You need strength to grow, to learn, to live. Do you trust me, Lily? Rook stepped closer, lowering his head so Lily's small hand brushed his fur. The dog's body radiated warmth, and Lily's trembling slowed slightly. She looked into Nathan's eyes, torn between fear and longing. Finally, hesitantly, she reached out and took the bread. She held it close at first, as though afraid someone might snatch it away, then bit carefully into the crust. Her eyes widened at the taste, as though it was not just bread, but something richer, the flavor of kindness itself. She chewed slowly, glancing around in nervous bursts, but when no angry figure appeared, her shoulders relaxed just enough for a sliver of relief. Nathan felt his chest tighten. He had not realized until now how much he had wanted to see her accept it. He stayed crouched, watching her eat with the care of a man witnessing something fragile and holy. Rook pressed closer, resting his head against her knee. "Good," Nathan murmured. "You're safe here." Martha shifted her basket and looked at Nathan with something between relief and worry. "She needs more than bread, officer. She needs school, clothes, a safe place to sleep. But you already know that." Nathan nodded faintly. "I do." Before he could say more, a voice called from across the square. It was Caleb Turner, a tall man in his 30s who ran the butcher stall. Caleb was thick-armed, his apron smeared from the morning's work, his face tanned from years of hauling and chopping. He was known as a man who kept to himself, neither cruel nor kind, but cautious in all things. He called out, "Cole, you ought not get too involved. Folks will talk. It's not worth the trouble." Nathan's eyes hardened, though his voice stayed even. "Sometimes trouble is the only thing worth facing." Caleb shrugged, unwilling to meet his gaze, and returned to his stall. Nathan turned back to Lily, who had finished half the bread and now clutched the rest close to her chest, as if hoarding a treasure. "Lily," Nathan said softly, "do you want to go to school?" She froze, her eyes widening as though he had spoken a forbidden dream. For a long moment she said nothing, fear and hope colliding in her gaze. At last she gave the slightest nod. "I do," she whispered, so faint the sound nearly broke apart. Nathan felt a faint smile tug at his mouth, the first in years. "Then I promise. I'll find a way." Lily's lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to blink away. She bit into the bread again, her hands still shaking. Rook wagged his tail, sensing the fragile trust that had been born between them. But, as quickly as the moment came, it shattered. From the far end of the market, John Miller appeared, his heavy frame cutting through the crowd. His face was red from drink, his eyes bloodshot with fury. He strode toward them, his boots pounding the gravel. Veronica was not with him, but the stench of liquor seemed to follow like a shadow. "Useless brat!" John bellowed, yanking the basket from Lily's hands. "Did you sneak something from a stranger again?" His large hand swung across her face, the sound cracking louder than the market noise. Lily stumbled, bread falling from her grasp, her small body collapsing to the ground. A choked sob escaped her throat. Nathan's blood surged. He dropped beside Lily, wrapping his arms around her trembling frame, shielding her from another blow. His eyes burned with fury as he rose, standing between John and the child. Rook bristled, a low growl vibrating through his chest, teeth bared in warning. "If you dare touch her again," Nathan said, his voice low and sharp as iron, "just try and see what happens." John froze for a moment, rage burning in his expression. Then he laughed harshly, though the sound lacked conviction. "Who do you think you are? This is my child, not yours. Stay out of my family." The crowd had gone silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Some murmured, but when John's gaze swept over them, they looked away. Martha clutched her basket to her chest, face pale. Caleb shook his head, muttering under his breath, but taking no step forward. Agnes Brewster's lips pressed tight, her hands clenching at her sides, but she stayed rooted in place. Lily pressed closer into Nathan's coat, her cheek reddened where John's hand had struck. Her small hands clutched at the fabric, as though it were her only shield against the world. Nathan's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "Stay still. Don't be afraid." John spat on the ground, his glare cutting deep. "You think you can play the hero, Cole? Don't fool yourself. Money, badge, it won't change anything. She's mine. Remember that." He turned sharply and stormed away, muttering curses under his breath. The crowd exhaled collectively, some whispering pity, others shaking their heads in resignation. Nathan bent down again, meeting Lily's wide, tear-filled eyes. He spoke softly, steadying his voice, though his heart ached. "You're not alone, Lily, not anymore." Her lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. She only nodded faintly, clutching his coat as though she believed it. Rook sat at her side, his warm flank pressed against her, tail resting gently on the ground. In that fragile circle, one man, one child, one dog. The market's noise returned, but for Nathan, time had shifted. The vow that had haunted him the night before solidified into something sharp, undeniable. He could not yet know how far this would take him, but he knew one truth. He would not let Lily disappear into silence again. The afternoon in Ashford faded into a brittle dusk, the air colder, the streets dusted with the first lazy flakes of snow. Nathan Cole drove slowly back from his patrol, Rook resting in the passenger seat this time, his amber eyes fixed on the world beyond the window. The dog had sensed his master's turmoil since the incident at the market earlier, and he gave soft whines whenever Nathan's jaw clenched too tight. Nathan's thoughts churned, Lily's swollen cheek, John's sneer, the crowd's cowardly silence. He pulled into his driveway, headlights sweeping across the pale blue siding of his quiet house. He killed the engine, but didn't get out right away, gripping the steering wheel as though it might anchor him. When he finally stepped inside, the emptiness weighed heavier than the night before. He made himself a cup of black coffee, though he barely touched it. Instead, he sat at his desk, pulling out folders he had once sworn he wouldn't revisit. The legal statutes on child welfare, protection services, and the requirements for intervention. Words blurred on the page, but the meaning was sharp enough. Without testimony, without evidence, his hands were tied. His phone buzzed. It was Sergeant Mark Denton, his superior. Mark had thick shoulders from years in uniform, thinning gray hair cropped short, and a face always flushed as though from sunburn. He had the reputation of a man who valued quiet over conflict, preferring paperwork to fights. Nathan answered, his voice flat. "Cole, you stirred something this morning," Denton said without greeting. "Miller's been down at O'Malley's bar, shouting your name loud enough to wake the dead. He's telling anyone who'll listen you're trying to steal his kid." Nathan rubbed his temple. "I stepped in because he hit her in front of the entire market. You can't ignore that." Denton sighed, long and weary. "Look, I'm not blind, but you know as well as I do, without witnesses willing to speak, it's his word against yours, and the town doesn't want the trouble. Let it go, Nathan. Don't bring your grief into this." The words cut deeper than Denton realized. Nathan's storm-gray eyes darkened. If protecting a child is grief, then maybe the department has forgotten its duty. He ended the call before Denton could reply, his hand shaking with fury. Elsewhere that same night, in the Miller home, chaos reigned. The house was dark except for the flicker of a single lamp. John slumped in his chair, his boots muddy, his shirt stained, the reek of alcohol heavy in the air. He shouted at shadows, words slurred into meaningless curses. Veronica stood in the kitchen, her slim frame tense, cigarette smoke curling from her painted lips. She was meticulous about her appearance even at home, hair styled, lips dark red, but her eyes carried a sharp impatience that could slice through anyone nearby. She watched Lily from the corner of her eye. The child sat on the floor near the back door, her knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. She had not eaten since morning, and her stomach gnawed at her. Veronica's voice broke the silence, cool and cutting. "Let her go hungry, John. Let her learn what happens when she embarrasses us. She'll be grateful for scraps tomorrow." John roared, throwing his empty bottle against the wall. "She humiliated me in front of the whole market. The brat's going to remember who's in charge." Veronica smirked, her voice syrupy sweet but cruel beneath. "And she will. Pain is a fine teacher." She turned away, indifferent to the child's trembling frame. Lily pressed her forehead against her knees, whispering to herself not to cry. Her voice was faint, but it steadied her in the silence. If I cry, they'll be angry. If I cry, it will be worse. The words became a mantra, one that stifled her tears even as they burned behind her eyes. At the same hour, Nathan sat back in his chair, the files spread across the desk. His eyes lingered on one name he had underlined years ago: Child Protective Services Regional Office, Elmwood County. He remembered the case that had broken him. A boy named David who had been sent back to an abusive household because the town refused to speak up. David had ended up in the hospital, bones broken, his life shattered. Nathan had sworn never again. Rook stirred at his side, ears flicking. The dog gave a soft bark and padded to the door. Nathan frowned, rising to follow. When he opened it, he found Martha Jenkins standing there, clutching a scarf tight around her neck against the cold. Martha looked weary, her limp heavier in the snow. "Evening, Officer Cole. I shouldn't be out this late, but I couldn't sleep. Thought you should know. People are talking. Miller's temper is worse since you stepped in. The girl may not last long in that house." Nathan's chest tightened. "You saw something?" Martha hesitated, her lined face torn. "I saw enough. But you know this town. Speaking up means putting a target on your back." Nathan studied her, then said, "Sometimes silence is the cruelest choice." Martha lowered her gaze. "I'll think on it." She handed him a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "If you see her again, give her this. It's more bread, some dried fruit. I don't know if it will reach her, but maybe it will keep her standing one more day." He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." As Martha limped away, Nathan felt the weight of her words settle like stone. The silence of Ashford was not born of ignorance, but fear, and fear could be as lethal as any blow. Inside again, Nathan sat with Rook at his feet. He opened his desk drawer and took out an old notebook, pages filled with half-finished reports, witness statements, and fragments of thoughts. At the very back was a page he had written years ago, after David's case. A child should never stand alone against the world. His pen hovered over the paper now, then pressed down, writing slowly. Lily Miller, 9 years old, malnourished, visible injuries. Father, violent, alcoholic. Stepmother, neglectful, complicit. Witness, Martha Jenkins. Possible. Evidence, none yet. He closed the notebook, exhaling a long breath. He had begun a record, one he swore he would not abandon this time. Later, as the wind rattled the windows, Nathan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Rook slept at his side, his steady breathing a comfort, but Nathan's thoughts drifted again to the Miller home, to Lily curled on the porch, her whisper carried into the night. He imagined her hunger, her fear, her silent endurance. And somewhere deep inside, the ice that had long encased his grief began to crack. The storm arrived that evening, sweeping down from the northern hills, bringing sleet that slapped against windows and turned streets into glass. Nathan sat at his desk, Rook sprawled at his feet, the notebook open in front of him, with Lily's name etched on the last page. He had spent hours writing, documenting fragments of what he had seen, when a knock at the door startled him. It was hesitant, uneven, as if struck by a hand unsure of its welcome. Nathan rose, his hand instinctively brushing the grip of his holster before he opened the door. A woman stood there in the stormlight, clutching a threadbare coat around her narrow shoulders. Her face was pale, drawn tight by hardship, eyes shadowed as though sleeplessness had hollowed them. She was in her mid-30s, with long black hair streaked with gray despite her age, falling damp against her cheeks. Her frame was slender, almost fragile, as though a strong wind might topple her. "I'm Anna," she said, her voice hoarse. "Anna Miller, Lily's mother." Nathan's breath caught. For years the town had whispered that Lily's mother had abandoned her child, vanishing without explanation. He had believed it himself. Now she stood shivering on his porch, eyes swollen with regret. He stepped aside wordlessly, motioning her inside. She entered hesitantly, glancing around his modest home. Rook rose to his feet, hackles twitching. But when he sniffed at her hand, he seemed to settle, as though sensing her sorrow. Anna's trembling fingers brushed his fur, and for the first time in years, perhaps, She allowed herself to touch something living without recoiling. Nathan gestured to the chair across from him at the kitchen table. "Sit. Tell me why you're here." Anna's hands shook as she unwrapped a small tin box from beneath her coat. She opened it carefully, revealing folded pieces of paper, drawings in crayon, worn at the edges. Children's drawings, flowers, stick figures of a girl holding hands with a woman, scrawled words in a child's hand. "Mom, I miss you." Tears welled in Anna's eyes as she pushed them across the table. "Lily sent these through a neighbor, years ago. I wasn't allowed near her. John would have killed me if he knew. I left because I couldn't survive his fists. But I didn't forget her. I never stopped." Her voice cracked, the words tumbling out like broken glass. "I never stopped being her mother." Nathan studied her, his storm-gray eyes hard, yet not unkind. "The town believes you abandoned her." Her hands clenched tightly together. "That's what he wanted them to believe. He told everyone I was weak, a coward. Maybe I was. I should have fought harder. But he would have hurt her worse if I stayed. I thought I could come back for her, but I never found the courage until now." Nathan leaned back, torn between anger and empathy. His memories of Emily and Hannah rose unbidden. His wife's warmth, his daughter's laughter, both lost forever. He saw in Anna not only weakness, but the heavy weight of guilt, the kind that bent a person until they nearly broke. Rook gave a soft whine, brushing his nose against Anna's hand. She looked down at him with trembling lips, whispering, "He remembers kindness, doesn't he?" Nathan's voice was steady. "He remembers truth." For a moment, silence filled the room, except for the storm's howl. Then Nathan asked, "Why come to me?" Anna's eyes lifted, shimmering. "Because you're the only one who's looked at her and seen her pain. The others turn away. You stepped in when no one else would. If anyone can protect her, it's you." Nathan's jaw tightened. Protection requires evidence, witnesses. The system demands more than a gut feeling. Anna pressed her fists against the table, desperation in her voice. "Then let me speak. Let me tell them what he did to me, what he's doing to her. My word isn't much, but maybe it's enough to start." Nathan studied her for a long moment before answering. "It won't be easy. You'll be dragged through the mud, called a liar, worse. Are you ready for that?" Her lips quivered, but her eyes burned with a faint flame. "For her, yes. For Lily, I'll face anything." Nathan leaned forward, his hands folding over the drawings. He studied the crude lines, the child's plea written in color. "Then we start here, with her voice." Rook barked once, sharp and clear, as though sealing the vow. Later that night, when Anna had gone to a boarding house run by a widow on Pine Street, Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman with kind eyes who rented rooms to those who could not afford much, Nathan stood at the window watching the storm sweep across Ashford. His chest ached with conflict. Could he trust Anna? Was she telling the truth, or weaving a story out of her guilt? Yet the drawings in his hand were undeniable, a bridge between mother and daughter carved in crayon and hope. Across town, in the Miller house, John drank himself into a stupor, Veronica muttering bitterly about Nathan's interference. Lily sat in the corner, her cheeks still swollen, her small fingers tracing invisible shapes on the floor. She whispered to herself, as she always did, though this time her words carried a faint flicker of hope. "Someone heard me. Someone saw me." And though the storm battered the windows, her whisper did not feel as lost as before. The morning broke gray over Ashford, the storm clouds having left a damp chill that clung to every corner of the small town. Nathan stepped out of his modest house, his patrol jacket buttoned tight against the cold, while Rook padded at his side, the German shepherd's black and silver coat slicked with dew. The town looked deceptively quiet, but Nathan felt the weight of turbulence rising beneath its surface. The Miller household, Anna's sudden return, and Lily's trembling pleas had carved themselves into his thoughts. At the precinct, Nathan found Captain Harold Reeves waiting by the bulletin board. Reeves was in his late 50s, tall but with a slightly stooped back from years of service. His hair was silver, cropped short, his skin weathered by long nights and unrelenting work. He had the reputation of being stern, pragmatic, but fair, though life had made him cautious about challenging wealthy or politically connected townsfolk. His eyes carried the quiet fatigue of a man who had seen too much injustice slip through his hands. "Nathan," Reeves said, his voice low, "I've been hearing things. You've been stirring the pot with John Miller." Nathan's jaw tightened. "He's beating his daughter. Everyone knows it, but no one will say a word. And now the mother has come back, claiming she was driven out. We can't ignore this anymore." Reeves rubbed his temples, glancing at the report stacked on the desk. "I don't doubt your instincts, but instincts don't hold up in court. John's got a reputation, ugly as it is, and Veronica has charm enough to sway neighbors. Unless we've got evidence, Nathan, all you'll do is make yourself a target." Rook growled softly, as if echoing Nathan's defiance. Nathan bent down, resting a steadying hand on the dog's broad back. "I've seen Lily's bruises. I've heard her fear. Evidence will come. I'll find it. I won't let her disappear into silence." Before Reeves could answer, the door opened and Martha, the elderly vegetable vendor, appeared. Martha was short, stout, her face lined by years in the sun, her hands calloused from lifting baskets. She wore a faded green shawl over her shoulders, and her expression was one of nervous determination. "I need to speak," she said, clutching a worn envelope. "I saw what happened to Lily. I've seen it more than once. I kept records, notes, even dates when she came with bruises. I didn't have courage before, but after what happened in the market, I can't stay quiet anymore." Nathan rose sharply, gratitude flickering across his features. Reeves frowned but gestured for her to sit. Martha pulled out a stack of folded pages, her handwriting scrawled but clear, listing days when Lily came to her stall, too thin for her age, carrying heavy loads, or when she winced from hidden injuries. "These aren't photographs, but it's truth," Martha said firmly, her brown eyes shining with conviction. "I know my word isn't much, but someone has to stand up for that child." Nathan reached across the table, his hand steady on hers. "Your word is more than enough to begin." Reeves sighed, heavy with the burden of command. "Fine. We'll log this officially. But Nathan, tread carefully. Men like John lash out when cornered." As if summoned by his name, John Miller himself appeared that evening in the market square, red-faced from whiskey, his voice booming across the cobblestones. He pointed a thick finger at Nathan, who had stopped to check on a delivery truck. "You think you're some hero, Carter, meddling in another man's family? You'll regret crossing me." The crowd froze, merchants whispering, customers pretending to busy themselves. Veronica stood nearby, her slender frame wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat, despite the mild evening, her lips painted crimson, her eyes gleaming with venom. She gave a thin smile and added, "Be careful, officer. This town doesn't take kindly to outsiders poking their nose where it doesn't belong." Nathan stood firm, his storm-gray eyes unflinching. "If protecting a child makes me an outsider, then I'll gladly wear the title." Rook barked sharply, the sound cutting through the murmur of the square. John sneered, muttering curses as Veronica tugged at his arm, pulling him back before his rage boiled over into violence. The crowd dispersed quickly, leaving Nathan standing in the cold glow of the lamplight, the threat heavy in the air. That night, Nathan returned home exhausted. He found Anna waiting on the porch steps, her coat drawn close around her, eyes rimmed red. She had tried to work at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house in exchange for rent, but whispers followed her through town, the old rumors of abandonment clinging like shadows. "People don't believe me," she said softly. "They think I left Lily because I didn't care. They call me coward. They don't see what John is capable of." Nathan sat beside her, Rook resting his head on Anna's lap, as though sensing her despair. "Their words don't matter. What matters is what you do now. If you're strong for Lily, then she'll know the truth." Anna's hands tightened in Rook's fur. "I will be. I swear it." The following morning, Nathan made his way back to Martha's stall. He wasn't surprised to find another figure there, Simon Hale, a reporter for the local paper. Simon was in his early 40s with sandy hair that always looked windblown and wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose. He had a thin build and a habit of jotting notes furiously on a small pad, his curiosity often mistaken for nosiness. Yet beneath it, he carried a stubborn streak for justice that had cost him advertisers more than once. "I heard whispers about yesterday," Simon said, adjusting his glasses. A girl, beaten, a mother returned, a cop stepping into shadows. No one wants to face. I think people need to read the truth. Nathan narrowed his eyes. This isn't a story to sell papers. Simon met his gaze steadily. No, it's a story to wake a town that's been blind too long. If you're willing, I'll publish what I can. Facts, witness accounts. The town might sneer, but they can't ignore ink on the page. Nathan hesitated, then nodded slowly. If you do this, you need to be ready for what comes after. Simon gave a wry smile. I've been ready for years. As the day waned, Nathan gathered Anna and Martha in his kitchen. The three of them sat together, an unlikely alliance of a weary mother, an old vendor, and a cop who carried too much grief. The papers, the drawings, the testimonies, all lay spread across the table. Rook lay beneath, his ears alert, as though guarding more than just their words. We're not enough alone, Nathan said, his voice steady. But together, we can build something they can't ignore. Tomorrow, I'll take this to Judge Harmon. He owes me nothing, but he listens to truth when it's laid plain. Anna's eyes brimmed with fragile hope. Martha gave a resolute nod, and Simon, standing in the doorway with his notepad, whispered as if to himself, "The town's about to remember what courage looks like." The storm outside had eased, leaving the night unnaturally still. Nathan leaned back, listening to the silence, feeling the first stirrings of change ripple beneath it. The battle was only beginning, but for the first time, he did not feel alone. The courthouse of Ashford was an old brick building that had stood for nearly a century, its facade weathered but still dignified, the columns streaked with years of rain. On the morning Nathan chose to approach Judge Harmon, the sky was overcast, the air thick with an uneasy stillness. Rook walked beside him, the dog's steady gait a contrast to the storm inside Nathan's chest. Judge William Harmon was in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, though his once dark hair had thinned to silver. His face bore the lines of both laughter and long hours, and his eyes were a pale, piercing blue that seemed to see through bluster to the marrow of truth. He had built a reputation in Ashford as a man who demanded respect in his courtroom, unwilling to bend to theatrics. Outside court, however, he was known for his love of fishing and quiet evenings, a man who craved peace yet constantly wrestled with the burden of justice. Nathan entered Harmon's chambers, greeted by his secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise Clark. Denise was in her late 40s, with auburn hair tied neatly into a bun, her posture immaculate. She was known for her efficiency and her protective loyalty to Harmon, shaped by years of watching politicians attempt to sway him. Her voice was calm but brisk. "Officer Carter, the judge can spare 15 minutes. Make them count." Nathan stepped in, placing the file of notes, drawings, and Martha's written testimony on the judge's desk. Harmon leaned back in his leather chair, his large hands folded, his expression measured. "Carter," Harmon said, his tone level, "you've made noise. John Miller's name is on too many lips this week. Tell me why you've brought this to me before an official case is even filed." Nathan held his ground. "Because every day Lily Miller stays in that house, she suffers. I don't have photographs, but I have testimony, her mother's account, and records from a witness. That child doesn't need another whisper of delay. She needs protection." Harmon studied him for a long moment, then lifted the crayon drawings, his eyes narrowing at the words scrawled by a small hand. Something in his features softened, though his voice remained steady. "These may move hearts, Officer Carter, but courts run on evidence that can withstand fire. Without that, the scales will tip back to her father." Nathan clenched his fists at his side, feeling the helplessness rise. "Then let me prove it. Give me the chance to gather what you'll accept." Harmon finally nodded, slowly, as if weighing the man before him as much as the papers on his desk. "Very well. I can authorize a preliminary investigation under the condition that everything you bring is corroborated. If you fail, this case dies before it breathes." Nathan inclined his head in gratitude. Rook gave a low bark, almost as though he understood a door had cracked open. That afternoon, Nathan met Simon, Hale at the newspaper office, a cramped space that smelled of ink and coffee. Simon's typewriter sat crooked on his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and photographs clipped to boards. A young woman typed quickly at another desk, Rachel Meyer, Simon's assistant. Rachel was in her mid-20s, petite with curly brown hair and round glasses. She was quiet, but her sharp mind was evident in the way she pieced together facts Simon overlooked. Unlike her boss, who carried the rough air of a man always pushing uphill, Rachel had a calm steadiness, her patience forged from growing up caring for her ill mother. Simon adjusted his glasses, scanning Harmon's authorization letter. So, the judge is willing to listen. That's no small feat. But it means every step we take now has to hold under scrutiny. Rachel spoke up softly, surprising Nathan. Then, we need to find someone in the medical field. If Lily's been hurt as badly as you say, there must be records, visits, untreated wounds, something. Nathan nodded slowly. A doctor. Someone outside John's influence. That evening, Nathan and Anna went to the small clinic on Oak Street. It was run by Dr. Samuel Keene, a man in his 50s with thinning hair, round glasses, and a kind smile that never quite hid the weight in his eyes. He had served the town for decades, patching up everything from farm injuries to broken bones. His broad frame and gentle hands made him seem both unmovable and comforting, like an old oak tree. When Nathan explained the situation, Keene leaned back, removing his glasses. I've treated Lily before. Bruises, sprains, even a fractured wrist. Each time her father insisted it was clumsiness. But I've known enough children to tell the difference. His voice dropped lower. If you're ready to fight for her, I'll give you my records. They may not show every wound, but they show a pattern. Anna pressed a trembling hand to her lips, her eyes brimming. Nathan exhaled slowly, a knot inside him loosening. They had more than testimony. They had tangible proof. Still, danger was never far. That night, as Nathan walked home, he noticed a shadow following at the edge of the street lamps. He turned sharply into an alley, Rook growling low in his throat. A man stumbled out of the shadows. Kenny Doyle, a wiry figure in his 30s with greasy blonde hair and a twitchy demeanor. Kenny was known in Ashford as one of John's drinking companions, a petty thug who survived on odd jobs and intimidation. You're poking where you shouldn't, Kenny slurred, his eyes darting nervously. John says you best back off. Men who don't usually disappear. Nathan stepped forward, his frame casting a long shadow. If John thinks threats will silence me, he doesn't know me. Tell him this. Every scare tactic is another nail in his coffin. Rook barked fiercely, teeth flashing in the glow of the street lamp. Kenny flinched, muttering curses as he slunk back into the dark. Nathan knew then the storm was no longer just whispers in town squares. It was a battle that would spill into streets, alleys, and courtrooms. But he also knew the lines had been drawn. Lily was no longer a forgotten child in the dust. She was the reason he would not falter. That night, as Anna tucked the crayon drawings back into her tin box, she whispered to Nathan, "For the first time, I feel like maybe, just maybe, Lily will see the light." Nathan looked out into the night, his hand resting on Rook's head, and let the weight of that hope steady him. The morning of the hearing dawned with a pale sun struggling to cut through a veil of fog. Ashford's courthouse, with its weathered bricks and solemn steps, looked heavier than usual, as though it carried the weight of every unspoken truth the town had buried. Nathan adjusted his uniform jacket, his boots striking the steps with quiet resolve. Rook padded beside him, his amber eyes alert, his thick black and silver coat gleaming faintly in the early light. The courthouse steps were already crowded with townsfolk, drawn not by duty, but by the lure of spectacle. Whispers fluttered like restless birds, some voices carrying pity for Lily, others murmuring skepticism about Anna's return. At the top of the steps, Simon Hale stood with his notepad in hand, Rachel beside him, her round glasses fogged in the damp air. Simon's sandy hair was tousled by the wind, his sharp eyes scanning faces, while Rachel's calm demeanor anchored him, her quiet focus on recording every detail. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper. Judge Harmon sat at the elevated bench, his expression stern, his piercing blue eyes sweeping over the chamber. Denise, his auburn-haired secretary, bustled at his side, setting documents in order with her precise, no-nonsense movements. The Millers entered next. John wore a neatly pressed suit, his broad shoulders filling it with false dignity, though his flushed face betrayed his recent drinking. Veronica, elegant in a navy dress with a string of pearls at her neck, clung to his arm, her crimson lips curving in a smile calculated to disarm. Together, they radiated the performance of respectability, as though cruelty could be disguised by polished appearances. Lily entered quietly through a side door, guided by Anna. The little girl's auburn hair was brushed but still unruly, her pale face too serious for her years. She clutched a small cloth doll in her hands, its seams frayed, its button eyes uneven. Yet it gave her courage. Anna, gaunt but composed, wore a plain dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson. Her posture trembled with nerves, but her eyes stayed fixed on her daughter with a mother's fierce love. Before proceedings began, Nathan noticed a new figure seated near the front. Caroline Hughes, a young social worker sent from the county office. Caroline was in her late 20s, of medium height, with chestnut brown hair pulled into a simple braid, her hazel eyes observant and steady. Unlike others who came for gossip, she sat with a notepad and pen, her every motion professional, her expression marked by empathy. Years earlier, Caroline had worked with foster children after losing her own brother to neglect in another small town. The experience had carved into her a resolve that no child should be unseen. The bailiff, a stocky man named Robert Dawes, called for order. Robert was in his 40s, with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. Though not deeply involved in the case, his presence was steadying, the kind of man who believed rules were meant to protect. Judge Harmon struck the gavel once, his deep voice filling the chamber. "We are here to examine the welfare of Lily Miller, to determine whether her custody should remain with her father or be reassigned. Each side will present their case. Evidence will be weighed. Truth alone will guide this court." Simon scribbled furiously as John rose, his voice painted with false humility. "Your Honor, I admit I've had my faults. Too much drink, too many burdens. But I have always loved my daughter. People twist stories. They don't see what we do at home, how much we provide. My wife Veronica has given Lily everything she needs." Veronica dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "We've struggled, Your Honor, but we've given her food, shelter, and discipline. Sometimes discipline is misunderstood. We only want her to grow strong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he held his silence until called. Anna rose next, her hands trembling as she clutched the tin box of drawings. Her voice cracked but grew stronger with each word. "I left years ago because John's fists nearly killed me. I was weak, and I hate myself for it. But I never stopped loving my daughter. These are her drawings, messages she smuggled to me through neighbors. She begged for me, even when I wasn't there. She deserves better than pain dressed up as love." Harmon studied the crayon drawings, his stern features softening only slightly. Then he turned to Nathan. "Officer Carter, you've involved yourself deeply. What do you present?" Nathan stepped forward, placing Dr. Keene's medical records on the table. "Your Honor, these documents show a pattern of injuries inconsistent with clumsiness. Bruises, a fractured wrist, untreated sprains. They mark a cycle, one that can't be dismissed as coincidence." Dr. Samuel Keene himself had been subpoenaed, and he now took the stand. The doctor's round glasses caught the light as he adjusted them, his voice measured but heavy with conviction. "I've treated Lily over the years. I know the difference between a child who falls and a child who's struck. These injuries weren't accidents. They were abuse." Gasps echoed. John's face darkened, but Veronica squeezed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, as if to silence his outburst. Caroline Hughes rose, presenting her initial report. "I interviewed teachers and neighbors. I observed Lily's condition. My findings support the claim of long-term neglect and abuse. This is not discipline. This is harm." Her steady hazel eyes met Harmon's, her words carrying the weight of professional authority. The courtroom trembled with tension. John finally snapped, his booming voice breaking through. "This is a conspiracy. You're all against me because I drink, because I speak my mind. You want to steal my daughter." He slammed his fist on the table, the echo harsh in the chamber. Veronica tried to salvage their image, but the mask slipped as she hissed at Anna across the aisle, her venom cutting through her polished tone. "You'll never have her. She's ours." Nathan stood protectively beside Lily, Rook at his heel. The German shepherd's ears perked, his stance rigid as though ready to spring at any threat. Harmon banged the gavel hard. "Order!" his voice thundered, silencing the chamber. He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes burning into John. "You speak of love, Mr. Miller, yet every action betrays your words. This court will weigh every shred of evidence before deciding. You would do well to remember you stand under oath." The gavel struck again, marking a pause in proceedings. The room buzzed with whispers, the townsfolk now torn between old loyalties and the flood of truth laid bare. Nathan exhaled, his hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder, feeling her trembling ease slightly beneath his touch. The battle was not yet decided, but for the first time, light pierced through the shadows. The second day of the hearing dawned with a brightness Ashford hadn't seen in weeks. The storm clouds had lifted, leaving the courthouse bathed in pale winter sunlight that glinted off the frost still clinging to the grass. Nathan walked up the courthouse steps, his posture straight, Rook trotting faithfully beside him, the German shepherd's fur shimmering like steel in the light. Today, he knew, would decide whether Lily remained trapped in her father's cruelty or finally stepped into freedom. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tense anticipation. Judge Harmon sat at the bench, his expression unreadable, though the lines of fatigue around his eyes betrayed the gravity of the case. Denise Clark, his auburn-haired secretary, moved briskly between stacks of papers, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The townsfolk filled the benches, faces eager, divided between loyalty to old reputations and the uneasy stirrings of conscience. Lily sat quietly beside Anna at the petitioner's table. Her auburn hair fell over her pale face, but her hands no longer clutched her doll as desperately as the day before. Instead, she held it gently in her lap, her fingers steady, as if hope had begun to take root. Anna sat taller too, still frail but strengthened by the fire of resolve. Nathan watched them from his seat nearby, his hand brushing Rook's thick fur for calm. The proceedings began with Simon Hale, the reporter, requesting permission to share material he had gathered. Harmon's eyes narrowed, but he allowed it. Simon stepped forward, his sandy hair mussed, his glasses slipping, as he laid out photographs of Lily carrying heavy baskets in the market, her face weary, her arms bruised. Rachel Meyer, his assistant, had quietly gathered them from townsfolk too nervous to testify, but willing to hand over what they'd captured on their phones. "These images," Simon said, his voice firm, "are not rumors. They are the truth the town has chosen to ignore." The gallery buzzed, shock rippling through. Harmon studied the photos with deliberate care, then placed them beside Keene's medical records. The pile of evidence grew heavier with each piece. John Miller, red-faced and restless, rose suddenly. "This is all staged, pictures twisted, lies stacked against me." He jabbed a finger at Simon. "That one's a parasite, feeding off misery." Before Harmon could respond, Caroline Hughes, the county social worker with her chestnut braid, stood. Her hazel eyes were calm but resolute. "Your Honor, I conducted my own unannounced visits. Each time, Lily was underfed, her clothing inadequate, her demeanor withdrawn. Combined with Dr. Keene's medical testimony, these photographs, and the accounts of neighbors, the conclusion is clear. Lily has been subjected to long-term abuse and neglect." Harmon nodded, making careful notes. But the true turning point came unexpectedly. As Veronica leaned to whisper furiously to John, a man at the back of the courtroom stood and cleared his throat. He was tall and lean, dressed plainly, with weather-beaten skin and hands rough from labor. His name was Paul Hartley, a farmer from the outskirts of town. For years, Paul had been known as quiet, withdrawn since the loss of his wife to illness, but respected as a man who rarely spoke unless it mattered. "Your Honor," Paul said, his deep voice carrying, "I seen things too. I kept my mouth shut because I feared what John might do. But I can't sit here while lies twist this court. I saw him strike the girl in the market with my own eyes, more than once. We all did." He turned to the benches, his blue eyes blazing. "And every one of you knows it." A hush fell heavy, murmurs spread, guilt surfacing on faces once passive. A few others rose hesitantly, neighbors, shopkeepers, each adding a piece of truth they had long hidden behind silence. John's fury boiled over. His broad frame trembled as he slammed his fist on the table, veins bulging at his neck. "You're all cowards, turning on me because this cop filled your heads with lies." His voice cracked into a roar, his mask fully shattered. Veronica, still seated, faltered for the first time. Her navy dress seemed to hang heavier as whispers of contempt spread through the gallery. Her painted smile slipped, revealing not charm, but desperation. Harmon struck the gavel hard, his voice a thunderclap. "Enough! This court has heard enough." His pale blue eyes swept the room, then fell on Lily, sitting so small yet so unbroken at the petitioner's table. What remains is not for theatrics, but for judgment. He leaned forward, his voice steady, but weighted with finality. This court finds John Miller unfit to retain custody of his daughter. Effective immediately, Lily Miller shall be placed under the guardianship of Officer Nathan Carter until permanent arrangements are secured. Anna Miller shall retain visitation and shared responsibility, pending further review. The gavel struck once more, echoing like a bell of liberation. The courtroom erupted, some gasps of relief, some mutters of anger, but at the center of it all, Lily's eyes filled with tears. She turned toward Nathan, her voice trembling but clear. "Does this mean I'm safe now?" Nathan bent down, his storm-gray eyes softened, his voice low but firm. "Yes, Lily, you're safe." Rook barked once, sharp and joyful, his tail sweeping the floor as though sealing the vow. Outside, the winter sunlight broke fully through the clouds. As Nathan guided Lily and Anna down the courthouse steps, Simon scribbled furiously, Rachel steadying him with quiet reminders, while Caroline walked beside them, her hazel eyes filled with satisfaction. Martha, the vegetable vendor, waved from the crowd, tears shining on her weathered face. Paul Hartley tipped his cap in silent solidarity. For the first time, Ashford murmured, "Not," with contempt, but with cautious admiration. That evening, Nathan brought Lily to his home. The small house that had long echoed with silence seemed warmer now. In the living room, Rook curled protectively at Lily's feet, while Anna prepared tea in the kitchen, her hands steadier than they had been in years. Lily wandered to a shelf, tracing her fingers along Nathan's old photographs of Emily and Hannah. She paused, then looked back at him. "They're your family," she whispered. Nathan's throat tightened. "They were. And now, you're part of what's left, part of what's new." Lily smiled faintly, the first true smile he had seen grace her face. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Thank you, Daddy." Nathan's vision blurred, but he didn't hide his tears this time. He knelt, drawing her into his arms, Rook pressing close, the warmth of life circling them all. Outside, the night settled gentle and clear over Ashford. For the first time in years, Nathan felt the shadows recede, replaced by light not only for Lily, but for himself. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, God sends His light through people and through love. The rescue of little Lily was not just the work of one man or one loyal German shepherd, but a reminder that God's miracles are real, guiding us when hope seems lost. In our own lives, we all face storms, but with faith, compassion, and courage, we can find healing and new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and your loved ones always. If you believe in His miracles, write Amen in the comments.